Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's podcast. My name is Kim, and I am mainly found hanging out on Instagram at Kim's Wellness Space. If you haven't listened to the podcast before, and this is your first one, I like to chat everything wellness. I think wellness is super important, and this gives me the opportunity to do exactly that. And it's my pleasure to have lots of guests to chat with me, and then we can learn about wellness from many different perspectives, because wellness is such a broad subject. So with that being said, I would like to invite Kirsty onto the podcast. Welcome, Kirsty.
Hi, Kim. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for being my guest. Okay, so our paths crossed originally from a Facebook group, and you were talking astrology, and that is something that I am fascinated with. So I was immediately drawn to what you were saying. So has astrology always been part of your life?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I grew up in a very conventional childhood. Both my parents, terribly conventional. I mean, I was born in the UK, but brought up in Australia. So occasionally you might hear a bit of Aussie twang come through,
Yeah.
particularly when I start talking about things that I feel really strongly about. My dad's a pharmacist, and my mum always was working at home, and they were both very into education and very straight things, very, very kind of Saturnian parents, very believed in education and access to jobs for life and that sort of thing. So they were the least hippie parents that you could imagine anyone could have.
Yeah.
And so when I moved to the UK, and I absolutely delighted in having a much more mixed population here with much less homogenous beliefs and a mixture of ideologies and cultures in the country.
Yeah.
I still carry on. I was qualified in teaching by then. My mum thought that me being a teacher was going to be just marvelous, because it meant that I would do something like take up tennis or golf and meet lots of other people like me. And I was never destined for that kind of life, but that was my mum's fond imaginings. And so basically, when I came here, I went straight into teaching in schools in East London. So inner London schools, it was very dynamic, it was very demanding. And I was very much part of that very, what I call a Saturnian profession. And Saturn is the planet of structure and authority and institutions. So I was right there, and I've got lots of planets in my Capricorn house, which is ruled by Saturn. So many people, their first professions you can see signs of that in their chart. Yes. And as we know, we don't have jobs for life anymore, do we?
We don't.
Most of us, we start off in something, and it's now widely accepted that we swap around. But back in the day, it was a jobs for life thing. So that's what my parents believed that I had. And it was actually really poorly paid. So I ended up doing lots of other work in the evenings on top of teaching. I did a lot of youth work. I ran holiday play schemes. I did lots of other things. Life brought me to move to the West Country in the UK, where I've been ever since. And it was only then that the great teaching profession kind of ejected me for a little while. And they said, hang on a minute, you did your training in Australia. And I said, yeah. They said, well, you can't teach here, you're not qualified. You didn't do that in the UK. So I was very suddenly without a profession, and I had to make a decision. And that's where I delved into my hobbies and the things that I'd been interested in thinking it was always a hobby thing.
Yeah.
And I retrained very quickly as an aromatherapist and a massage practitioner. And my partner at the time owned a commercial. I know this is a long story, but we're getting there. My partner at the time ended up, he was a commercial property developer, and he had a commercial property that wasn't letting out. And he was saying, I just don't know what I'm going to do with it. And I said, I've got an idea. And so I'd already worked out that being a mobile massage practitioner is incredibly demanding and probably not unsustainable for me. Yeah. So I said, I'm going to open a wellbeing center. So I just kind of did it. I'd never had any experience before running a business, being self-employed, anything like that. So with that extraordinary energy that people often have in their 20s, where you just get an idea and you go. That's what we did. So the rooms upstairs were converted into treatment rooms, which I sublet to all kinds of practitioners, everybody from nutritionists to counselors, acupuncture, reflexology, massage, shiatsu, one of my favorites. So from there, I kind of had my grounding in understanding all kinds of things about how to gain and sustain well-being, not just a reasonable level of health, but I understood then, and I'm sure this is something you explore a lot in your work, the difference between I'm kind of okay and true well-being.
Absolutely.
And this well-being centre, I opened it in a town where it was the west of the West Country in the UK. No one had really heard of half of these therapies or anything before. And it was a really extraordinary time because I was manning the reception all the time. And so I was having these well-being conversations with people constantly.
Amazing.
And it was then that I began to gain a new kind of respect for people's well-being. And to understand through those conversations about just how individual we all are. And I really started to gain some insights into people's ideas and theories about their well-being, about their entitlement to it, about their entitlement to understanding about how a holistic approach to our well-being is so much more important than thinking about the mental well-being, thinking about something about my physicality, thinking about, my psychological well-being, and my spiritual well-being. We think of those things as component parts, almost like we run like a car. There's something that goes wrong with one bit and you fix that. And then you run over to the other end and there's something going on with my mental health. I learned to think about humanity from a much more meta perspective. And of course, there were some really quiet times when I was running the reception, and I turned the reception to encourage people to come in. I turned the reception into a little bit of a shop, and I did my own aromatherapy products, and I used to sell supplements and lots of things like the batch flower remedies, which are just akin to magic in my view, and all kinds of bath products and conventional things, but also lots of books. So in my quiet times, I used to sit there and read all the books. And that was where my curiosity about astrology was first tickled.
Okay.
And I thought, this is really interesting because particularly about the relationship between astrology and well-being. Because I was thinking what I can see here is bearing out everything I'm learning on the ground with all these conversations I'm having with people, learning about individual differences and tastes and preferences. And so that's where it started. So that's a long time ago now. That's 27, 25, 26, 27 years ago. And so I always, even though I moved, I very unexpectedly ended up being a parent. So I had to give up having the Wellbeing Centre after a few years, which was a shame.
Okay.
But it had left its legacy for life. And
it's amazing.
Even though it was actually, it's only, like 2020 hindsight is incredible, isn't it?
It is.
And I look back now and I think what a sort of baptism of fire it was. But also, now that I understand my own astrology and I understand my chart more, my North Node, that place in your chart where you're always supposed to end up in the end or be working towards it, my North Node is in Pisces, which is all watery and mutable and open to ideas and possibilities and looking at things from a meta perspective and being quite unfixed and open to new ideas. So that was my first taste of where my chart was encouraging me to go.
That's so interesting. I love that. And I think that you literally are the perfect guest for me to start off this second year of talking to lots of people about wellness, because wellness is a word that is bandied around so much now that it's kind of lost its power because it's just like a marketing tool, isn't it? And listening to what you were saying there about understanding everybody's individual and how you've got to work as a whole rather than saying, well, I've just got to sort this one bit out and then all that will work. It's absolutely perfect. And I completely agree with what you say. I mean, I am an accountability coach. And so the majority of people come to me and say, I need you to support me losing weight. And usually by the time we get to the end of our time together, that isn't the bit that we focus on at all. And that actually really wasn't the problem. There were so many other things. And then because they sort the other things out, the weight just kind of does its own thing and sorts itself out. You know, it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
That really is. Yeah, that's interesting. And is that a pattern that you see a lot?
All the time. Whenever I say to someone, what do you want to achieve in the first 4 weeks? Like, what's your goal? They always 9 times out of 10 say, I want to lose weight. And by the time we get to the end of that first week, it's usually nothing about weight. It's about, they're really stressed. So they're eating without thinking what they're eating, or, there's so much to it. It's not really about the fact that they can't lose weight. It's just that their focus isn't quite on the right area.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
very interesting.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So I know that you, with your astrology and your sharing, you help people through burnout. So how do the two come together? How does that make sense of each other?
Okay. So it took me a while to thread this one together for myself as well. And it was really through my own journey. After I went into family life for quite a long time, I made a return to teaching because I thought, well, this is going to fit in around my children, and I really want to be spending time with them, and it's perfect. So through various means, I got my teaching qualification okayed again, and I returned to teaching. And this time I was working in a highly specialized environment, very pressurized, special needs specialist school.
Okay.
Working with neurodiverse young people. And I loved it, and the pupils were incredible, but it was so demanding. And of course, me being born into that very Saturnian patterning, not just around the profession that I was in, but also, and I think we can all recognize this one in our Western society around toxic productivity, about always wanting to do the best job possible, always being busy, always being on. And of course, what we're learning about burnout now, because it's quite a popular topic at the moment, is that it's those values around how we see ourselves and social safety. We think, this is what I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
So starting first of all with those foundational values, which often they're so baked into our subconscious, we don't realize how deeply they're rooted. And they are linked to social safety and wanting to be approved of and wanting people to like us and being seen as a worthy member of society. I totally had that baked in. And it was hiding to nowhere. Basically, there was just a point where I couldn't carry on in the job. And so I can't go into it a lot for all kinds of reasons. But basically, I then entered a state of burnout, which my doctors were supportive, but they didn't really know what to do with me.
Okay.
And I was under supervision from the hospital for a long time. I was attending counselling. It was very serious, like at the strongest end of burnout. The medical profession at the moment say it's between 1 year and 3 years recovery time. And I would say it took me all of that to recover. And as much under pressure as I was to return to some form of work, and of course, all those values were still chattering in the back of my head saying, come on, you've got to go back to work. You've got a family to support. You've got income to think about. I tried all kinds I searched endlessly for other jobs. I did all kinds of things and none of it worked. None of it worked. It was a very difficult time. But it wasn't until somebody said, look, what does your chart say about all of this?
Yeah.
Like, what, come on, the conventional approach to this isn't working. A very dear friend of mine I've known for a long time. And I then had an astrology reading with this extraordinary American astrologer called Anne Orterly. Highly recommend listening to her stuff. And she just kind of said, oh, yeah, well, I'm not a bit surprised that happened. She said the planet. Well, she literally was looking at the transits. So that just means that, because, of course, the planets are constantly moving around in our chart.
Yeah.
We have a natal chart where our planets were in fixed positions when we arrived.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they move around from that position as well, some faster, some slower. Yeah. And as they arrive at different points and strike up different relationships with those geographical points where our original planets were, it sparks off different events.
Right.
So
okay.
I had Pluto that came and sat right next to my natal sun in Capricorn. And she said, oh, Pluto, yes, it's the great destroyer. It took down everything. It's a very casual statement about this huge event in my life. And it helped me to see everything from a much more meta perspective. And she was able to name exact dates and times when things happened.
Wow.
So, okay, amazing. Well, that's not really a surprise to me. I can see that it was very difficult for you. Then she said, don't worry about it, though. She said, you won't have to do anything like that again for another 280 years. Oh. Pluto moves around so slowly. And that helped me sort of regain a sense of humor and a different philosophy on what had happened in my life.
Yes.
And also on my own propensity for burnout itself, because I was born with a Virgo South Node, and the energy of Virgo is wanting to be of service, wanting to be so good at what we do, wanting to always do the highest possible achievements in our job, wanting to climb the promotional ladder, being incredibly forensically organized and on it.
Yeah.
And she said, by the time you pair that up with, your Saturn over there and these things, and your terror of not having enough resources in your life because of where Saturn is, she said, it's the perfect storm. So she said, you've come in with this stuff. And now, she said, the tools to help you move on from it are still in your chart. The answers are there.
Yeah.
And so, of course, she helped me look at some other things in my chart that would help bring me comfort and help with my recovery. And also, she said, a Virgo South Node, this is what the qualities we arrive in our life with, our gifts that we turn up with in a bag.
Yeah.
She said that will naturally bring about a lot of hanging around in your head, a lot of overthinking, a lot of worry. She said the key to your well-being and your return to that is probably something you've never done in your life. Listen to what your body is telling you.
Wow. That's amazing, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And so I started to investigate somatic practitioners.
Okay.
And so I started looking at the work of Irene Lyon and Erica Chalkley and Kathy Kane. Lots of brilliant ones around, really, really good. And I had this horrific, it was horrific because it was so upsetting at the time, but it was a real epiphany that actually I'd been so in my head all those years. I had no idea that my body was actually telling me, you're not safe, you're not safe, you're not safe.
Yeah.
You don't have enough in the world. You don't have enough. And to try to reprogram and retrain that, and even just to feeling that it's safe to listen to what your body is telling you and to even begin to attune yourself.
Yes.
Learning that kind of attunement where you realize that your body's trying to tell you things. And there are, like, the astrology chart can be applied to so many situations, but I found it was very useful for example, the 6th house in anybody's chart is about day-to-day routines, particularly around well-being. So for a lot of the people that you work with, I would be encouraging them to have a look and see what's in their 6th chart in their astrology.
Okay.
And to see what the ruling planet would be and where that is, because sometimes it's not in its own house. Usually it's somewhere else.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
that will tell you about what your challenges might be and how you start to work with that.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And my 6th house is ruled by the moon, which is all about nurture and self-nurture. It's not about self-punishment. You think about what this world tries to tell us about well-being. It's supposed to be punitive.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be about denial. No pain, no gain. You know, I mean, how many different sayings can you come up with? How many different appalling well-being strategies people try and introduce into their lives on a January?
Yes. Oh,
how many
gosh,
articles do we see online? You know, 800 calories a day, and it worked for Michael Mosley, so it's going to work for you. I've got a really good bit of gossip I'll tell you later about Michael Mosley.
Okay.
But and these things are constantly put in front of us. There is only one way to live in a healthy way, and that's through denial and self-discipline. And that flies in the face of the way I needed to approach my holistic well-being, which is actually totally through self-nurture, masses of sleep, masses of water, hydration.
Yes.
I've lived my whole life dehydrated.
Yeah. And I'm sure that there are many people out there that are exactly the same. I have to say, when I'm coaching, the first thing that I always focus on is sleep, because so many people are sleep deprived. So many people think that if they need to take rest, then they failed, you know, can't possibly have 3 rest days in a week. You know, who has 3 rest days? Who takes a whole week off? But it's exactly what you say.
You're not allowed to do that until you're half dead and you consider yourself retired.
Yeah.
It's madness, isn't it? I really hope. I've just got such visions for the future of well-being for us all. I'm quite excited about the topic because I think there's so much we haven't really thought about yet. Not really. We haven't so much knowledge that we haven't really questioned, like the notion of retirement.
Yes.
I still want to have my intellect engaged. I still love working. However, I also know that if I get too into that, I'm still just as susceptible to burnout as I've ever been.
Yeah.
So it's really important to have those boundaries around working hours. And as you know, I advocate for a cyclical approach to work. So there's a time to rest, there's a time to research, there's a time to nurture your intuition and go within, and then there's a time to reach out and expand our contact with our our online communities, our face-to-face communities.
Yes.
And so there's another way that astrology can also really help, and that's with prevention.
Okay.
So we think about, are you in the right place in your life? How do you feel about your life purpose? Do you feel like your life really fits your needs really well? Do you know what your needs are?
Yeah.
And of course, so my postgraduate, after I did my teaching and I did many years with that, my postgraduate that I did here in the UK was careers guidance interviewing.
Ah, okay.
So
That's
there's a whole separate conventional layer to my skills, which I combine with the astrology to really do deep dives into life purpose things and the reason that we're here, which sometimes is attached to or involved with our day jobs. And sometimes it has nothing to do with it. Sometimes we're here to do something that is not about our day-to-day work. Sometimes it's something else.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so, I think this is why I find it so fascinating. The more I learn about it, the more it makes sense in my brain. And I just think it's so sad. Actually, it's one of these subjects that people don't necessarily give a good go to when they hear it, first of all. I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, growing up, anything about astrology was probably Mystic Meg in the paper. Do you know what I mean? And everybody knew it was nonsense. And she was, I mean, I don't know, maybe she'd have a good background in it. I don't know, but it was a bit of a joke. And so if you say astrology, a lot of people that I know immediately think, oh, what a load of rubbish, blah, blah, blah. But having been in your Facebook group, I love the fact that every day you're like, okay, so this is Monday, which means that this being ruled by this planet. These are good things to do. Maybe don't do this. And sometimes I, could be having a day where I'm really struggling with something. And I think, do you know what? I'm going to walk away. Oh, I'll have a look at Facebook. Oh, I haven't looked at Kirsty this morning. What's she saying? And then I read it and I'm like, that's why I'm not doing that. I'll do it tomorrow. And then I do it tomorrow and it's perfect. You just think it's so good to be aware of these extra tools that we don't necessarily take, we're not using them properly, are we? It's like you were saying about being aware of your body. So many people don't acknowledge how they're feeling. Like as a yoga teacher, one of the first things we always do at the beginning of yoga is just check in and say, how are you feeling? But not just that quick, oh yeah, I'm fine. But how are you actually feeling, like in your mind, in your body, your mood? And then when you get to the end, have another check in, like but we're so busy. We don't check in with ourselves at all, really, until it's too late and we're poorly. And then it's like, maybe my body was telling me that a couple of weeks ago and I didn't listen.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? We're not encouraged to, even with just simply stillness is just virtually forbidden. It's seen as a treat.
Yes.
Or it's seen as something that you have to earn. Work 6 days, until you're on your knees, and then you can have 1 day off, and then you're back on it on Monday morning.
Yeah.
Right? We were never designed to live like that.
No.
We were never designed to live like that. I mean, thanks capitalism. But, I promise I won't get political here, but it's a nonsense. It's an absolute nonsense. And we can still be powerful, dynamic, insightful human beings, making much wiser use of the energy that we have on a cyclical basis to achieve all kinds of miracles.
Yeah, absolutely.
We just don't have to work robotically. Who the hell thought of that?
I know. It's quite strange, isn't it? But I think very slowly the world is changing. I think there are more people like yourself and myself and other people that I know, and slowly the message out there is changing. And I know when we retired and moved to Cyprus, like, we have a really slow life now, but it took me about a year to get myself into that pattern of not having to achieve every day. It didn't matter if I just went to the beach, that was fine. But actually, since I've embraced that slow living and got used to it, I'm way more productive than I ever was before. I have a lot more energy. My brain is firing more. It's because I'm working with it. It's amazing.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, now I know. Loving watching your stories and your posts on Instagram. Absolutely love them. And I saw the footage the other day of you out walking the dogs. And I was wondering where you are. So it was a question I had for you that you've already answered now. And, the life by the pool and all that kind of lovely stuff. Yeah. Do you have your clients mostly from the UK?
Yes, and we do everything online, and it works really well. I mean, I think that's a silver lining from 2020. I personally did a lot of self-work. I did a lot of growth. I know a lot of people had a really hard time. I don't want to diminish what a lot of people went through, but for me personally, it was exciting. I had all of this time all of a sudden that I could learn the things I wanted to learn. I could research, I retrained, and it's just opened up a whole world for me.
Well, yeah, it was such a mixed bag, wasn't it? And it was deeply traumatic for some people, even if their well-being wasn't particularly affected, and in which case, they were lucky. There's a lot of people who felt that isolation from other people so keenly. For example, anyone I know who has a moon in Leo, it was a kind of torture to not be able to go out into community and see people face to face, and to have to wear a mask, things like that. And the rage that can bring up in people. I felt intensely sorry for, you could really see the people who were really struggling. And then I knew other people who were saying, actually, I quite like it. I don't feel like I've always got to be on.
Yes.
Like, I haven't got to wear a smile on my face because I've got a mask on, so I could just let my face relax. Yeah. So the people who have a natural need to mask a bit more, quite literally in themselves, when they go out and do their shopping or go and meet somebody in a public place, that doesn't always suit everybody so well.
No. Yeah.
And I think it certainly, didn't it shine a lens on that kind of what our personal needs, social needs are?
Yeah, absolutely. And so my husband and I are quite different like that. So for him to recharge his batteries, he needs to be socializing, he needs to be out with people. Whereas I charge my batteries by being completely on my own, in peace and quiet. I won't even have the radio on. I like the silence, and I just cherish that time on my own. And so, we had to find out different ways of dealing with being, not being able to go out, fascinating.
Yeah, it is. I don't live very far from Glastonbury. I'm down there quite a lot. You'd think that Glastonbury would be a hotbed of astrology.
Yes, you would.
It kind of isn't really. If there's lots of other things that are going on, particularly around energy healing, and people making remedies and spells. There's a lot of magic culture down there.
Yes.
But I've had some of my most interesting astrology conversations with people in one or two of the bookshops. And actually the whole debrief, like people started talking to each other like never before, really honestly.
Yes.
After lockdown, and just sharing experiences about it seemed to bring out extremes of behavior in so many people. And there's nothing like, I don't think we take face-to-face contact with people for granted now.
No, I agree.
And access to community and just having freedom.
Yes.
Actually having freedom.
Yes.
It's given us all new appreciation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Finding our own way with that.
Yeah, and the freedom thing's really interesting. So we were actually stuck in the UK at the beginning of the lockdown. We had to get a special flight back into Cyprus to be able to come home. And when we arrived in Cyprus, we had to go and do a 2-week quarantine in a hotel room. And it was very strange. Like, I knew it was going to be difficult. We both discussed it. We took things with us so that we were able to keep ourselves occupied. We kind of had a bit of a plan of what we were going to do. And the thought, a few people said, oh, you'll be fine. You're in a hotel room. You've got a telly. It will be lovely. But knowing that we couldn't leave that room for 2 weeks, I can't tell you how much I wanted to leave that room. It was, the morning that we were allowed to leave, we were bags packed by the door, like, now, is it time? Can we? And the people in the room next to us said, oh, do you think they're serving breakfast this morning? And I said, I don't know. I am out. I don't want to stay a moment longer. I couldn't bear. It was a really surreal experience, really surreal. I learned a lot about myself in those 14 days.
Wow. Yeah. What was your biggest takeaway about yourself, if you can share that?
I think my biggest takeaway was that I am actually a very controlling person. And when my control is taken away, I panic. And so I find tools to bring that control back. And I think it was probably as we got to the beginning of the second week that I realized that actually, if I just relaxed and just went with whatever was going on, it would be a nicer experience. And it did change. So we had decided when we got there that we would still have structure. So we would get up at a certain time, we would walk steps around the hotel room, we would get dressed. And then all of a sudden I said to my husband, you know what, I'm not actually getting dressed today. I'm going to stay in my pajamas because it's only you and me. I'm not going anywhere. It doesn't matter. And I'm going to watch a film. And yeah, it is 9 o'clock in the morning, but I'm going to. And that change actually really helped us. It made the second week easier.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, so many people like that sort of structured container for their, like a timetabled life. And yeah, that's really interesting. Really interesting. That's one of the things that actually that burnout did for me, was completely remove structure and timetabling. So I didn't have to go anywhere. I didn't have to do anything.
Yes.
And what was also interesting is that my executive function was quite badly affected because of the long-term stress. I used to have straight hair. I used to have very straight hair. And that, like, the stress of it actually made it curly.
Wow.
Yes, it's true. Like when they say something will make your hair curl. Yeah, it was seriously chronic long-term stress. But what was interesting is that the removal of that timetable brought me in like a big return journey back to myself, but having to experience time and space really differently. So my sleep pattern was totally like knocked out. Yeah, I used to dread the time going round to about 10 o'clock at night, because I used to feel like I'm supposed to be going to sleep now, I'm supposed to be getting ready to rest. Yeah. And the more that happened, the more I could feel myself getting more and more stressed, thinking I'm not going to be able to sleep. I'm not going to be able to sleep. And there was a real pressure on that. Yeah. And I remember listening to the shipping forecast, Radio 4, 10 to 1 every night. And I used to find that incredibly reassuring, because it was at one stage, that was the only timetabled marker in my 24 hours. Okay, yeah. Was that. And this guy used to come on. I don't know if you've ever listened to it, but there's this guy that comes on and he does, so it's the announcement of the locations and the wind speeds and the temperatures and different geographical markers around all of the key points on the UK coastline.
Yeah. Okay.
And so it's not a narrative. It is literally a list of data.
Yeah.
So he'll say the name of the place and the port and the wind speed and the tides and things like that. And it will literally be a voice listing all of these things.
Yeah.
And it's got a particular music. I think it's called Sailing By. It's got this particular bit of music that goes on at the beginning. And then there's this massive list of data that goes on for about 10 minutes. And then you have the music again at the end. Yeah. And it's really interesting what you say about timetabling and structure and then having that taken away. And the shock that can put us into as humans when we are expected to be entirely self-autonomous.
Yes.
Entirely. And how unsettling that is. How I'm certainly for me at that point, it made me it really did make me question my sanity. I mean, I had so much going on. It was quite an uncomfortable time. But it's funny how fond I became of the shipping forecast. Because it helped. It was a marker. It was like a lighthouse in my 24 hours.
Yes.
That, okay, it's 10 to 1. Lots of other people are going to sleep now, but actually I'm not going to sleep. I can feel myself wired.
Yeah.
But this reminds me that there's lots of other people in other parts of the world still doing things according to their rhythm. So you have people doing night shifts in hospitals. You have people working in factories around the clock. There are people working in 24-hour greenhouses, supervising the growth of our food. There are people working in the coastline, emergency services, nursing, care homes, and it was just this reminder that no matter where you are and what you're doing in that lost 24 hours, someone else is also alive and doing their thing according to their routine. So even though you might feel lost, there's lots of other things going on in the world that can help give you a marker of normality.
Yeah. Oh, I really like that. That's really interesting. It's very true, isn't it? I suppose it goes back to what you were saying. It's about the safe feeling. And that's kind of a generational learned thing that we all kind of pick up, don't we? And we carry forwards. And we, living here now, we don't really wear watches. If we've got an appointment, yes, we know what the time is. But, if the sun's awake, we tend to get up. When it goes dark, we tend to go to bed. We eat when we're hungry. We're much more in tune with probably our ancestors, I suppose, than the majority of people that are alive now. I can't remember what book it was that I read, but I read a really good book, and it said that if you wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and think, oh my God, it's awful, I shouldn't be awake, why am I awake, what's going on, that actually that's a perfectly normal thing for humans to do. And that before we had all these timepieces and control, people would go to sleep when it was dark, but then they would get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and they'd probably have a meal and a chat, and they could be other things, and then they'd go back to sleep and then get up with the sun. And I was like, actually makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Sort of releasing those learned sort of barriers to personal attunement, really.
Yeah.
There's that, well, my body's telling me I need to do this now.
Yes.
I have to say that from that perspective of health, I'm finding the perimenopause fascinating, because you have no choice but to tune into that.
Yes.
It just isn't a choice. And that's okay. Right. Like you have that thing that you were saying about a feeling of control, or like a change to your personal rhythms, means that you can either suffer through it, or it certainly does. This has been just my personal experience so far, and I'm not a menopause specialist, but you can either kind of suffer through it, or you can really pay attention to the fact that everything changes, including our bodies. And we're just learning about ourselves again and who we are now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I 100% agree with that. So I'm not a menopause expert either, but I have written a book about it because I wanted to share my experiences, because I didn't think that there was enough information.
I didn't know this. This is good. Yeah.
Because there is more information now, but I still feel that it's very mainstream, and it's like, yeah, you've got this, you need this pill. And I'm not a pill person. So I wanted to find an alternative. And the more I learn about it, the more I think that, like, exactly like you say, you have to pay attention. And there's no point fighting it. We're all doing it. It's a natural part of our human experience. We're supposed to do it. So let's go with it. I like to think of everything as an experiment, like what's going to happen next. But I did actually learn this week that when we go into puberty at sort of around 13 and you start your periods, it actually takes your body 7 to 10 years for the mind hormone connection to make sense of the change, so that you can then have your regular periods and get ready for childbearing, if that's what you're going to be doing. So it kind of makes sense that when we get to this end, it's going to take 7 to 10 years for our brains to undo that and to find the new. I just thought that was amazing. And I'd never come across that before.
That is absolutely gripping, isn't it? Really, really interesting. And something else, I don't know if you've heard of matrescence before, but that's something that's, I only found out about it. I ended up being friends with somebody on the same kind of training course as me, and she's a coach, and she's looking and moving more into working within matrescence. So apparently it's the study of the profound changes that go on physiologically, emotionally, everything through motherhood. But in general, it is the journey of womanhood. Yeah, but particularly in and around motherhood, and there is that societal expectation that we pop our kids out and we just keep walking.
Yes,
and preferably in the same size jeans that you were wearing before you fell pregnant.
Exactly.
and we're all supposed, everything's supposed to happen effortlessly, and if we don't, like, we're made to feel terrible, or we make ourselves feel terrible because we were taught there's only one way to do it.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel like matrescence, where I hope that the whole topic of women's medicine in particular ends up undergoing a whole resurgence of priority, of research funding, and preferably a bit more writing done by women rather than men.
Yeah, that would be good, wouldn't it?
It really would. And like, we're just having to have a whole rethink. What's really interesting is that I decided to I had the massive frightness put on me about the whole menopause thing. Did you see the Davina McCall program?
I haven't actually watched it. I didn't watch it.
I'd be fascinated to know. Like, let me know if you watch it, because I'd love to hear your thoughts. She talks a lot about the menopause, and obviously she goes into it as a journalist / investigator, not as an expert. So she's not appointing herself as an expert, which I thought was good, but she does go to talk to a lot of different people about it. And she's a huge advocate for HRT. Yeah. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe this is something I should be doing. Like, I don't know, should I? I don't know. I went and had a chat to my doctor about it, and because I'm a fan of integrated medicine, despite what I've described around starting a wellbeing centre, and it was full of alternative and complementary medicines. Yeah, I'm a fan of integrated medicine, so I pick the best of what's going to work for you. Find out everything that's available without overwhelming yourself, and then maybe be prepared to try some stuff. Yeah, and see what feels best. And because I'm a pharmacist's daughter, and I can't help but that real conventional background, and also having also worked with neurotypical young people, and also young people with profound medical needs. I mean, way beyond. I don't know how some of those young people sail through one day to the next, but I have also seen drugs work the most extraordinary miracles. Yes. And and I think it's, at one stage I was very anti conventional medicine, and then when I started working with young people with profound medical needs, whose lives were completely changed for the better, like gave them access to lives that they would never have had otherwise, they would never have seen the light of day. Or even reach their 16th birthday if it hadn't been for advances in medicine and conventional drugs. And so I really checked my privilege then, because I thought, hang on a minute, it's all very well for me to say I don't want to take a paracetamol, but actually the next time I start to say, oh, big drug companies, they're terrible, it's my own perspective on it through my own learning that I realized I can't speak for everyone. It's fine for me to speak for me. But, and I have never to this day, I mean, I wrote quite extensively about my burnout recovery, because for many, many people, the GPs had two things to offer me. One was, you really need to get some exercise. You have to exercise.
Yeah.
The second one was, would you like these pills? Because that's all we've got. This is all we've got for you. No, a third GP offered me a book on psychology, and it was that thick.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
I did buy it because I was desperate to get better. I hated my position. It was just ghastly. Really, really frightening. Really frightening to realize that you can break. Even someone like me, who constantly been charging through life like that, it was my big comeuppance, really, for want of a better expression. And when the doctor said to me, and it was also, she was the occupational health consultant at my local hospital, and she came bustling into the waiting room with her from her power walk in her lunch hour, wearing the white trainers, plunked herself down at the desk and said, "Right, how are you doing?" And I'm sitting there thinking, you have no idea. You have no idea what it's cost me to just be able to get here today.
Yeah, absolutely.
The terror, like, my confidence was so low, couldn't even leave the house very easily, didn't answer the phone, wasn't getting dressed, lots of things, self-care, absolutely out the window. And she said to me, and I said, "Look, seriously, how do you suggest that I get better from this?"
Yeah.
And she leaned across the desk, and I was sitting there and bawling my eyes out, like blowing my nose, just like, I hate this. I hate this. What do you think what can I do? What can I do? You must have seen this before. And she just said, "You really need to get some exercise, That was it.
Yeah.
And I thought, I can't even clean my teeth some days.
Yeah.
Is that the best you can do? Now, the thing is, there is truth in that to an extent. It's not untrue, but it did show a lack of awareness of my position to simply just say that to me.
And you have to be able to get to a point you have to be able to get to the point to be able to do that, You can't just get up and go for a walk, can you? If you, like you say, if you're not cleaning your teeth or the basic functions aren't working, how are you going to do that?
Leaving the house, answering the phone, if you're not in a place to do those things. The medical professional just doesn't know what to do with burnout. And I think you're right, in the same way that we need to be looking at alternatives and looking at it from a more meta perspective on supporting ourselves through menopause. We also need to be thinking about avoiding burnout and, burnout related illnesses to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely.
In avoidance is so important, but also, how are we now addressing those things that have been created by inappropriate societal expectations?
Yeah.
And conventional medicine doesn't know what to do with it. They just don't. I mean, the fact that bless them, my GPs, most of them were really nice. They were so supportive. Yeah. And I also had an incredible union that really helped me too.
Okay.
But the GP saying, "Oh, here, go away and read this book on psychological recovery." It's called I can't remember the title now, and it's irrelevant because I didn't end up reading it. Yeah. I got partway through the first chapter. What none of them seem to understand is that burnout causes quite an extraordinary level of executive function damage. It is literally brain damage that happens. It can be temporary, but this is one of the reasons why we must factor in a very long recovery time.
Yeah, I was just going to say to you, I'm sure if you're in that position, reading a book that's technical and like that, it's the last thing you want to do. It's that's
crazy. It. And I mean, I'm at the stage now where I'm trying to put together, I am putting together some resources for a holistic approach to burnout recovery.
Oh, that's really good.
And so that's work in progress, but I have to think so carefully about format. There's no point in me writing a book for somebody who's burnt out. No, you'd be better off buying them a houseplant or cooking dinner for them, Yeah,
absolutely.
That's more. That will contribute more because they'll never read it.
No, that's right.
And it's really interesting. one of the many reasons I think we need to think much more holistically and broadly about recovery and self-nurture and well-being is because our world is kind of going a bit tilted. I don't know if you've noticed, but our world is going a bit tilted, and I want to be really positive because I think it's really important that we do that when we can.
Yeah.
But the realistic thing that's happening now, certainly here in the UK, is that access to drugs, access to regularly prescribed drugs, is out the window.
Yeah.
I mean, I did speak to my GP about HRT, and they said, well, I can prescribe it, but the regularity of supply right now is actually a bit of an issue. Do you want to go and have a chat with the pharmacist and see what they've got to say about it? And so we very literally have to think about what all of our resources are, not just popping the pill and hoping that's just going to do it.
Yeah.
It's good to have alternatives to think about in terms of self-care, in terms of prevention, and in terms of self-understanding and self-compassion.
Yeah, I completely agree. And hopefully, us having conversations like this and then going out in the world will definitely spark some interest. Maybe people will go and have a bit of a research. I think it's really important for people to go find out information for themselves, not just take it, ask the questions, be inquiring about it. I don't want to cut you off because I'm loving talking to you, but I am really aware of how long we've been talking to, and the StreamYard will just stop when I get to an hour. So is there anything that you want to say just to kind of wrap it up? Or, if people want to find you, to work with you, how can they find you?
Yeah, okay. So I have two different websites because I have sort of two different streams of work. So one of my websites is stellarguideastrology.com. And that's where you can contact me to find out more information about the astrology, the one-to-one astrology readings that I do.
Yep.
And the other one I have is KirstySinclair.com. And that is my work with burnout recovery one-to-ones to help people formulate their own personalized recovery plan, because we need some alternatives and some more holistic approaches. And of course, as you know, I've got a free group on Facebook that you can come and join, and that's called Thriving Life Beyond Burnout.
Yeah, and I would highly recommend that. That's brilliant.
That's a lot of fun, yes. And I do a live on a Sunday evening to give you an overview of the astrology for the week. And then I do daily posts, and we get chatting in there sometimes about how those energies that are going on, which are different every single week, are showing up in our lives in real ways, and how we work with that.
That's super. Thanks so much, Kirsty, for joining us today. All of that information, all the things that we've talked about, I'll make sure they're all in the show notes so that people can find it if they want to and go and explore this subject a little bit more. But thank you so much for talking with me today.
You're welcome. It's lovely to be here. So good.
Okay, so that was Kirsty Sinclair. I really hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. We chatted for much longer than we do normally, which is brilliant because I love it when those things flow. So yeah, go have a look at the show notes, go and explore for yourself, and I will speak to you all very soon.